Welcome to Mr. Kellen's Stories. How's your day going? We'd love to know more about you. Where are you from? Drop a comment below, and let's start a conversation with people from all around the world. Here at Mr. Kellen's Stories, we bring you heartwarming, suspenseful, and emotional tales that will captivate you from the very first word to the last. Every story we share is crafted with love, designed to touch your heart and stir your soul. From a small-town woman caught in the whirlwind of a powerful CEO's world, facing life-changing decisions, to a love story that breaks through all societal boundaries, proving that true love doesn't care about money or status. It's all about the connection. Don't forget to subscribe and be part of this amazing journey with us. Lena Parker had never imagined her life would take a turn like this. Born and raised in a small town in Alabama, she had always known what it meant to struggle. Her family wasn't rich, far from it. But Lena had learned the value of hard work early on. From the moment she could walk, she was helping around the house, taking odd jobs just to make ends meet. By the time she reached adulthood, she had already worked as a waitress, a receptionist, and a part-time tutor. She juggled these jobs, scraping by with just enough to pay the bills and keep food on the table. Her dreams were big, though. Lena wanted more than this life. She wanted a future where she didn't have to worry about bills or debt, where she could experience the world and live without the constant fear of financial ruin. But despite her hard work and determination, the gap between her reality and her dreams seemed insurmountable. It was like chasing a mirage, always just out of reach. One night, after a grueling shift at the local diner, Lena came home exhausted. She sank into the old couch in her modest apartment, her body aching and her mind racing with worries about her mounting bills. She barely noticed the flickering light from her laptop as she absent-mindedly clicked it open. Her inbox was full of spam and work-related emails, but one subject line caught her eye. A proposal you can't refuse. At first, she thought it was just another scam or marketing ploy, but something made her pause. The sender's name stood out: Alexander Stone, CEO of Stone Tech Industries, a multi-billion-dollar tech company that was known for shaping the future of technology. Her eyes widened as she read the first line of the email. Dear Ms. Parker, I would like to offer you an extraordinary opportunity, $3 million for just one night of your time. Lena blinked, not sure if she was reading this correctly. Was this some kind of joke? Her heart skipped a beat. The email continued, explaining that Alexander Stone, the man behind the enormous success of Stone Tech, wanted to meet with her, and for one night he was offering her a sum of money that most people would never see in their lifetime. The proposal was blunt, yet intriguing. It was clear from the words on the screen that this wasn't some casual offer. Alexander wasn't asking for her company in any typical way. No, he was proposing something far more unusual. He wanted her for one night, and in return, he was offering $3 million. There were no strings attached, no complicated agreements. The details of the night were left vague, but the amount of money was more than enough to make Lena's heart race. Her mind started to whirl. $3 million. She had worked so hard her entire life just to pay off debts and cover the basics. She had never once dreamed she would be in a position to have this kind of money, let alone for something as simple as spending a night with a stranger. But it wasn't just the money that gripped her attention. It was the mystery of it all. What kind of person made an offer like this? Why her? She didn't know Alexander Stone, nor had she ever interacted with anyone from his world. Lena sat frozen for a moment, her fingers hovering over the keyboard. Her mind flashed to her family, her aging mother who had recently been diagnosed with a medical condition, her younger brother who struggled to find a stable job, and the crippling debt she'd been working so hard to escape. She couldn't ignore the weight of it all. She had always dreamed of a better life, but this wasn't the way she imagined getting it. Was it wrong to accept such an offer? The question gnawed at her as she leaned back in her chair, her heart pounding in her chest. She had heard rumors, stories about wealthy men making these types of propositions. Some of them were true, some not. But they all painted a picture of a life far beyond anything she could fathom. Yet none of the stories prepared her for this moment, the moment when the opportunity to change her life was sitting right in front of her. Lena knew she wasn't the only one who struggled. She had watched her friends, her family, and everyone around her fight to stay afloat, to keep moving forward. But every day felt like a battle, a fight she didn't know if she could win. And now, here was an offer so tempting it felt like a miracle, the kind of miracle you'd only read about in books. But at what cost? She read the email again, her heart torn between her desire for a better future and the fear that this was too good to be true. $3 million. She could pay off her mother's medical bills. She could buy a house, secure her family's future, and maybe even finally travel to places she had only seen in magazines. It was more money than she had ever imagined, but why? Lena ran her fingers through her hair, her breath shallow. This was not a decision to be taken lightly. It was the kind of choice that could change the course of her life, for better or worse. She closed her eyes, picturing her mother's face, imagining how happy she would be if all their troubles were finally over. Could she pass up this chance? The fear of regret crept into her thoughts. What if she turned it down, only to face more years of hardship? She had fought so hard to get to this point, and here was the chance to step out of the shadows. But what if it was a mistake? The email still sat open on her laptop, its words echoing in her mind. One night, $3 million. Lena clicked the reply button, her fingers trembling. She wasn't sure what to expect, but she knew one thing for certain. This would be the most important decision of her life. As she typed her response, something inside her shifted. She didn't know what would happen, but she was about to step into a world far beyond anything she had ever known. The night felt longer than any she had ever known. Lena lay awake in her bed, staring at the ceiling, the weight of the decision pressing down on her like a 100-pound stone. The world outside her window was quiet, the usual hum of the city muted by the late hour, but inside her mind, it was chaos. $3 million. The number kept echoing in her thoughts, drowning out every other rational thought, every concern she had about the decision ahead. Her fingers ached from gripping the phone all night, staring at the email she had received from Alexander Stone. She read it again and again. The words had become blurred on the screen, but the offer, the temptation, had only grown sharper. It wasn't just the money that was pulling her in. It was the dream, the life she had always imagined, the life that had seemed impossible just days ago was now within her reach. But the price was steep, far steeper than anything she had ever imagined. Could she really do this? Lena turned onto her side, pulling the thick blanket closer around her shoulders, but it didn't provide any comfort. The silence in her apartment felt suffocating. What kind of person takes money like this? It wasn't just any offer. It was from a billionaire, a man who had everything, who could have anyone he wanted. Why her? And why such an absurd offer? The idea of selling her time, her presence, her very being, for such a high price unsettled her. She had always worked hard, but she had always done it on her own terms, in ways that felt honest, even if it wasn't easy. Taking money for something so personal. Lena felt like she was betraying the very essence of who she was. Could this decision change everything she stood for? But then her mind turned to her family. The bills that had piled up higher than ever before. Her mother's health, which had taken a turn for the worse. The medical treatments, the endless prescriptions, the never-ending cycle of debt that seemed to haunt them like a dark cloud. Was this the chance she had been waiting for? Could this offer, this one extraordinary night, change everything for them? She squeezed her eyes shut, feeling the pressure of it all. The thought of losing her mother to an illness that she couldn't even afford to treat broke her heart into pieces. The thought of never being able to provide for her brother, of watching him struggle to make a living, tore at her soul. She had worked her entire life, giving everything, but what had she truly gained? The answer, she realized, was not much. She was stuck in the same cycle, chasing after a dream she couldn't touch. She had done everything by the book, lived her life the right way, but somehow it still hadn't been enough. And now, here was an offer, an opportunity, sitting in front of her like a golden ticket. Lena's chest tightened as her thoughts spiraled. What if this was her only chance? What if she let it slip away? Was she willing to let her family suffer just to hold on to her ideals? Was she willing to choose pride over survival? Unable to rest, she reached for her phone and dialed Sarah's number. Her best friend had been there for her through thick and thin, through every bad breakup and every heartache. If anyone would understand, it would be Sarah. As the phone rang, Lena felt a small flicker of hope, a glimmer of comfort, knowing that Sarah would listen. "Hello." Sarah's voice was warm and sleepy, but there was no mistaking the concern when she heard the tension in Lena's voice. "Sarah, I don't know what to do," Lena said, her voice trembling. "I got an offer, a proposal, a crazy one. I don't even know if I should tell you, but I'm losing my mind here." Sarah immediately sat up in bed, now fully awake. "What happened? Lena, you're scaring me." Lena took a deep breath and recounted the email, the proposal, the money, the man. She felt foolish as the words left her mouth, as if she was speaking a line from a movie, a world so far removed from everything she had ever known. When she finished, there was silence on the other end of the line. Sarah didn't rush to respond. Lena could hear her friend's quiet breathing, processing what she had just said. Finally, Sarah spoke, her voice calm but firm. "Lena, $3 million is a fortune. This could change everything for you. Think about it. You could pay off everything. You could give your mom the medical treatment she needs. You could help your brother. Hell, you could even get out of this town if you wanted to. You could have the life you've always dreamed of." Lena felt her throat tighten. It was exactly what she had been thinking, but hearing it aloud from Sarah's lips made it all too real. The dream, the escape from the daily grind, the suffocating burden of financial worry, was within her reach. All she had to do was say yes. "But it feels wrong, Sarah," Lena whispered, her voice barely audible. "It feels like I'm selling myself. I'm not just taking money for a service, you know. It's like he wants more than just my time. He wants something else, and I don't know if I can do that." Sarah sighed softly, the sound filled with understanding. "I get it, I really do. It's not easy. But listen, Lena, you've worked your ass off for so long. You've given everything, and where has it gotten you? Stuck in a life you don't want, stuck in a place you don't belong. What if this is your chance to finally break free? Don't let your pride get in the way of your future. If you think about it, you're not really selling yourself. You're buying a future for you and your family." Lena closed her eyes, letting the weight of Sarah's words sink in. She wasn't sure if she believed them completely, but part of her knew Sarah was right. This could change everything. "Just promise me you'll think it through," Sarah continued. "Take your time. Don't make any rash decisions. But know that this could be your way out." Lena stared at the empty space around her, feeling a tear slip down her cheek. She wiped it away quickly, not wanting to show weakness. not wanting to admit how torn she truly was. Was this the right thing to do? As the conversation ended and Lena hung up the phone, she was left alone with her thoughts once again. Her heart raced with anticipation and dread, torn between the opportunity in front of her and the fear of losing herself in the process. The decision loomed over her, heavy and consuming. The world outside was still, but inside her everything was moving, her dreams, her fears, her desires and her doubts all colliding. Lena knew she had to make a choice, and no matter what she decided, it would change her life forever. As dawn broke, casting soft light through her window, she stood up, her mind clearer than before. The choice was hers to make, but one thing was undeniable. She couldn't ignore this opportunity, not anymore. Lena's heart was a wild drumbeat in her chest as she stood in front of the towering building that housed Alexander Stone's penthouse. The skyscraper gleamed under the afternoon sun, its modern glass exterior reflecting the bustling city around it, almost mocking the quiet, humble life Lena had known all her years in Alabama. This was another world, one she wasn't sure she belonged to, but one that was beckoning her nonetheless. She hesitated for a moment, her fingers tight around the straps of her purse as the weight of her decision suddenly felt more tangible. Was she really about to do this? Really about to meet the man who had turned her life upside down with a single email? It was one thing to think about it, to imagine the money, the future she could have. But standing here, about to walk through the doors of a world she had only ever seen in movies or the pages of glossy magazines, felt entirely different. Could she really go through with it? Taking a deep breath, Lena pushed the doubt aside. She had already made her decision. She was here, and there was no turning back. The penthouse loomed before her, an intimidating beacon of luxury. She stepped inside, her heels clicking softly against the polished marble floors as she was greeted by a sleek, elegantly dressed woman who escorted her to an elevator. The ride was silent save for the soft hum of the machinery, but every second felt like a lifetime. The higher they went, the more surreal everything seemed. When the elevator doors opened, Lena was greeted by the kind of opulence she had only ever dreamed of. The penthouse was breathtaking, sprawling with an airy, modern design. Expansive windows gave a panoramic view of the city below, the skyline stretching out before her like a sea of endless possibilities. It was magnificent, beyond anything she could have imagined. Her breath caught in her throat as she walked further inside. Soft lighting illuminated the room, casting long shadows on the sleek furniture. It all felt carefully curated, a work of art in itself, and it only served to highlight how out of place she felt. Lena, dressed in her modest attire, felt small in the face of such extravagance. Every step she took was filled with hesitation, as if at any moment the facade of this surreal reality would crumble and she would wake up back in her small apartment in Alabama. But then she heard it. A voice, deep and commanding, came from across the room. "Ms. Parker," he said, and Lena's heart skipped a beat. She turned, her eyes locking onto the man who had made the offer she couldn't refuse. Standing in front of her, almost like a statue carved from stone, was Alexander Stone. He was tall, well over 6 feet, and his sharp features were framed by dark, tousled hair. His suit, a deep charcoal grey, was tailored to perfection, hugging his frame in a way that spoke of wealth, power, and influence. There was something about him, something magnetic. His presence alone filled the room. Lena felt her pulse quicken as their eyes met. He was even more handsome in person, if such a thing was possible. His eyes were dark, intense, like two pools of mystery that seemed to hold secrets she was both terrified and intrigued to uncover. The moment their gazes locked, Lena felt a heat rise to her cheeks, a mixture of nerves and something else, something she couldn't quite name. "Ms. Parker," he repeated, his voice smooth and deep, like the sound of velvet sliding over silk. "It's a pleasure to meet you in person." Lena blinked, trying to find her voice. She wasn't sure what to say, how to act, or what she was even supposed to feel. All she knew was that she had never felt so out of place in her entire life, and yet, at the same time, she couldn't help but feel the pull of his gaze, the weight of his attention. "Mr. Stone," she finally managed, her voice trembling just slightly. She cleared her throat, trying to steady herself. "Thank you for inviting me." Alexander Stone took a step toward her, his movements graceful, like someone who was completely at ease with their surroundings. His eyes never left hers, and Lena felt an odd sense of vulnerability under his gaze. He wasn't just observing her. It felt as though he was seeing straight through her, to the very core of who she was. It was unnerving. "You're very welcome." His lips curled into a small smile, though it didn't reach his eyes. It was more of a polite gesture than a sign of warmth, and Lena couldn't help but wonder what lay beneath the surface of that smile. "Please, make yourself comfortable." He gestured to the lavish seating area, his voice low and steady. "Can I offer you something to drink? Champagne, perhaps? Or wine? I have an excellent selection." Lena hesitated. She wasn't sure if she should accept, but she didn't want to seem rude. She nodded. "Champagne would be nice, thank you." As Alexander walked over to the bar to pour the drinks, Lena couldn't help but notice how effortlessly he moved, how much control he seemed to have over every situation. It was like everything in his life was meticulously planned, and he was always in charge. It both intimidated her and drew her in. He returned moments later with 2 glasses of champagne, his gaze never wavering from her. He handed one of the glasses to Lena, his fingers brushing hers lightly as he did so. The touch sent a jolt through her, making her heart race even faster. What was it about this man? "2 new beginnings," Alexander said, his eyes meeting hers in a silent challenge, "and to everything that lies ahead." Lena clinked her glass against his, though her hand trembled just slightly. "To new beginnings," she echoed, though the words felt hollow in her mouth. What was she really toasting to? Was it the money? The chance to change her life? Or was it something else entirely? As they both took a sip, Alexander studied her with a careful, assessing gaze. "You're far more beautiful in person than I imagined," he said, the words almost casual. But there was something in the way he said them that made Lena's stomach flutter. Was it a compliment or an attempt to unsettle her? She wasn't sure. "Thank you," she said, her voice quieter than she intended. She found herself suddenly aware of the way she was standing, the way she was holding herself. She wasn't used to being in the presence of such wealth, of such power. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The silence between them felt thick, almost tangible. It was as if the air itself was holding its breath, waiting for something to happen. Finally, Alexander broke the silence. "I imagine this is a lot to process," he said, his voice low but steady. "But I don't want you to feel uncomfortable. You're here because I believe you deserve more than what life has given you so far." Lena's breath caught in her throat. She hadn't expected him to say something so personal. The way he spoke, as though he understood her struggles without her saying a word, sent an unexpected wave of emotion rushing through her. She wanted to be angry, to remind him that she didn't need charity, but somehow his words didn't feel like charity at all. It felt like something else. "Why me?" she asked, before she could stop herself. The question had been burning in her mind since she first saw his email. She needed to understand why he had chosen her. Alexander smiled again, but this time there was something darker in his eyes. "I've always been drawn to people who don't ask for handouts, people who fight for what they want, who work for everything they have. You remind me of someone I once knew, a woman who had everything taken from her and fought to rebuild herself. Lena's heart skipped. Had he just compared her to someone from his past? But before she could ask more, he moved toward the window, his gaze sweeping over the city once more. "I know this is all very overwhelming, Lena," he said, his tone now more gentle. "But tonight, I want you to forget everything else. I want you to be here with me and nothing else. Just one night, that's all it takes." Lena's mind was spinning, her heart racing with anticipation and anxiety. She couldn't help but wonder, what was he really asking for? The evening carried on with an ease Lena never expected. It wasn't just the grandeur of the penthouse or the sparkling glasses of champagne that had calmed her nerves. It was the man standing before her, a figure so enigmatic and larger than life, who had managed to make her feel at ease despite the strange and surreal circumstances. Lena had expected Alexander to be the kind of man who lived entirely in his own world, surrounded by sycophants, living for the power and the luxury he had earned. But instead, as their conversation progressed, something unexpected began to emerge, something that made Lena see him in a new light. He wasn't just a man of wealth, and he certainly wasn't the confident, arrogant figure she had imagined. There was a quiet, almost vulnerable side to him that she couldn't have anticipated. They had already discussed the surface-level topics, how Lena had gotten to where she was, her family struggles, her dreams of escaping her small-town life. But slowly, as the hours wore on, their conversation took a deeper turn. They began to share more personal details, peeling away the layers of their lives that they had long kept hidden. "Tell me about your childhood," Lena asked, the words slipping out before she could stop herself. She was curious, but part of her also wanted to understand how someone so seemingly perfect, so seemingly invincible, could ever feel lonely. Alexander sat back in his chair, his eyes momentarily distant. His fingers traced the edge of his glass as he looked out at the glittering city beyond the windows, the night sky stretching endlessly above them. There was a long pause before he spoke, as if he were weighing whether or not he should let her in. "I grew up in a family where love was transactional," he said quietly. "My parents were never emotionally available. They were distant, always more concerned with appearances and status than anything else. I learned early on that affection didn't come without a price. If I succeeded, I was praised. If I failed, I was ignored." His voice was even, but there was a subtle tension in the way he spoke, as if recalling those years brought him discomfort. Lena could hear the loneliness in his voice, something she had never expected to find in a man like Alexander Stone. The towering figure of wealth and power suddenly seemed more human to her. He wasn't just the CEO of a billion-dollar empire. He was a man who had spent his life yearning for something more. "That sounds—" Lena trailed off, unsure of what to say. She couldn't relate to his upbringing. Her parents had always been there, no matter how tough things got. But she understood the ache of longing. She had lived with it, in the sense that she had always dreamed of a life she could never quite reach. "Yeah," Alexander continued, his voice a little softer now. "It's strange, isn't it? How success can't fill the emptiness you feel inside. People look at me and think I have it all. Money, power, freedom. But none of that brings the one thing I need. Connection, real connection with someone who understands me, someone who doesn't just see the title, but the person behind it." Lena swallowed hard, the air between them thick with unspoken understanding. She wasn't sure why she felt this sudden pull towards him. Maybe it was the way his vulnerability seemed to mirror her own, how they were both searching for something they could never seem to find. He wasn't just a rich man throwing his wealth around. He was a person just like her, trying to fill a void that money couldn't touch. I can't imagine what that must have been like, Lena said softly, her voice barely above a whisper. But I get it, the whole loneliness thing. I mean, I'm not rich, but I've spent a lot of my life feeling like no one truly understood me, like I was just invisible to the world. Her words surprised her, but as soon as she said them, they felt true. The past few years had been a blur of constant struggle, constantly fighting to keep her head above water, while everyone around her seemed to have it easier. She had poured herself into work, into caring for her family, but somewhere along the way, she had lost touch with the idea that she could ever have something more, a deeper connection with someone who could see her for who she truly was. Alexander's gaze softened. "You're not invisible," he said gently, his voice low and earnest. "I see you." For a brief moment their eyes met, and the weight of his words sank in. It wasn't just a passing comment. It was an acknowledgement of everything she had gone through, everything she had struggled with. And in that moment, it was as though something clicked. The man who had seemed so distant, so untouchable, was now someone she could relate to on a deeper level. She had been so focused on the differences between them, her small-town background, his global empire, her fight to survive, his wealth and influence. But now those differences felt irrelevant. They were both just human beings, each trying to make sense of their own lives, each carrying their own burdens. Lena found herself opening up to him in a way she never expected. The conversation moved easily between them now. No more pretenses, no more barriers. They talked about their hopes, their regrets, and the mistakes they had made along the way. Lena spoke about the dreams she once had, of becoming more than just a small-town girl working 2 jobs to scrape by. She shared the pain of watching her mother suffer from illness and the guilt she felt for not being able to fix it. She admitted how much she wanted to escape, but didn't know how. Alexander listened intently, his gaze unwavering. He didn't offer solutions or advice. He simply listened, and for the first time in a long time, Lena felt heard, truly heard. It was an odd feeling, but a comforting one. As they talked, Lena realized something startling. This man, the powerful CEO she had once feared, was not so different from her after all. They both had dreams. They both had longings that couldn't be fulfilled by money or status. They both had a need for connection. It was an unexpected bond, but it was real. And in that moment, Lena understood something profound. True connection doesn't come from status, wealth, or power. It comes from shared understanding, from seeing the humanity in someone else, no matter who they are or where they come from. As the night wore on, the conversation continued, flowing freely between them like a river that had finally found its course. By the time the evening came to a close, the air had shifted. The tension from earlier had dissipated, and what remained was a quiet sense of mutual respect and understanding. The man sitting across from her, who had once seemed like a distant figure of perfection, now felt more like a man she could relate to, a man who, like her, had been shaped by pain, by longing, and by a desire for something more. For the first time that night, Lena didn't feel like she was just here for the money. She wasn't just fulfilling a role or a transaction. She was here, in this moment, with Alexander Stone, and for the first time she didn't feel like an outsider. As the night unfolded, Lena's mind began to wrestle with an increasing turmoil she hadn't anticipated. The weight of the decision that had brought her here was never far from her thoughts, but the conversation, the connection she had found with Alexander, made everything more complicated. The world she had known before this night, the struggles, the sacrifices, the constant fight for survival, seemed distant now, like a fading echo of a life she was quickly starting to realize she might never return to. It wasn't supposed to be like this. She was supposed to come here, fulfill her end of the bargain, and leave with the money that could change everything. A life of luxury, a way out of the suffocating debts, a future where she didn't have to worry about where the next meal would come from. It had been a simple transaction in her mind. One night. That was all. One night for $3 million. But now, as midnight approached and the evening drew to a close, she found herself questioning everything. The way Alexander had looked at her earlier, the quiet sincerity in his voice when they had talked about their pasts, the shared understanding between them, none of that had been part of the plan. What was happening between them? She sat on the edge of the plush sofa, her fingers nervously curling around the stem of her empty glass, as she thought about how far she had come from the woman who had arrived here that afternoon, unsure and uncertain. She had been so focused on the money, on the chance to fix her life, that she hadn't stopped to think about the emotional cost. But now, with the evening drawing to a close, she couldn't ignore the pull she felt toward Alexander, toward something deeper than just a financial transaction. Her thoughts were interrupted when Alexander stood from his chair and approached her, his movements slow and deliberate. He seemed to notice her shift in mood, his sharp eyes studying her with an intensity she couldn't quite place. There was something else in the air now, something heavier than the casual, polite conversation they had shared throughout the night. It was a quiet tension, like the world was holding its breath. "I think it's time we settled the matter at hand," Alexander said softly, his tone almost hesitant, as if he too was unsure of what this moment meant. He moved towards the nearby table and picked up a thick envelope, its contents clearly heavy. His eyes never left Lena's as he approached her, and for the first time that night she saw something different in his gaze, something vulnerable, almost uncertain. Had he been expecting this? He held the envelope out to her, but there was something in his eyes that told Lena this wasn't just a simple transaction anymore. It wasn't just about the money. It never had been, not for him. And deep down, she realized it wasn't just about the money for her either. This night had changed something inside her, something she couldn't ignore, no matter how hard she tried to convince herself it was just a fleeting moment, a temporary distraction. Lena's breath caught in her throat as she stared at the envelope in his hand. She could almost feel the weight of it pressing down on her. It represented everything she had fought for, everything she had longed for. It was freedom. It was a way out, a way to escape the life she had been living for so long. It was everything she had dreamed of, and yet it suddenly felt like too much. Her hand shook slightly as she reached for the envelope, but before she could take it, Alexander spoke again. "I want to see you again," he said quietly, his voice a soft command, laced with an emotion that made Lena's chest tighten. There was no pretense in his words now, no power games. It was a simple, honest plea. Lena looked up at him, and for the first time she saw him without the armor of wealth, without the suit and the power he wielded in the world. What she saw now was just a man. Someone who had lived a life that had shaped him, who had felt the sting of loneliness and unfulfilled desires, just as she had. There was no denying the connection between them now. It wasn't just a fleeting attraction. It wasn't just the result of one night of indulgence. Something deeper was forming. Her heart beat faster, and for a moment she wasn't sure what to say. She had come here for the money, for the chance to escape. That had been the plan. But now that plan was beginning to unravel, piece by piece. She had imagined walking out of here with the money, never to see Alexander again, never to let him into her life. But the truth was, she didn't want that anymore. Lena stood up slowly, her hands still trembling as she held the envelope in her grasp. She didn't know what was more terrifying, the thought of taking the money and leaving, or the thought of staying and allowing herself to fall deeper into something she wasn't sure she could control. "I came here for the money," she said softly, her voice faltering, unsure whether she was saying it for his benefit or her own. I didn't expect any of this connection, this feeling. Alexander's gaze softened as he stepped closer, his eyes searching hers, as if he were trying to understand what she was really saying. His voice was quieter this time, almost like a confession. "I know you came for the money," he said, his words laced with a sincerity that caught her off guard. "But I want more than just your company for a night, Lena. I don't want to buy your presence. I want to earn your trust. I want you to be a part of my life, not just a fleeting moment." Lena's breath caught in her throat as she processed his words. Could she trust him? Could she allow herself to believe that this man, who had so much power over the world, was being genuine in wanting more from her than just a night of company? She had heard enough stories of wealthy men who used their money to manipulate people, to play games. She had never imagined she would find herself in the midst of such a situation. But this was different. The way he looked at her, the vulnerability in his voice, told her he wasn't just speaking out of desire. He wanted something real, something beyond the world they both occupied. "I don't know if I can trust you," Lena whispered, the words heavy with doubt and fear. She had been hurt before, abandoned, betrayed. She didn't know how to navigate these emotions, how to make sense of the confusing feelings swirling inside her. "I understand," Alexander said softly, his voice filled with empathy. "But I want to prove to you that I'm not like the others, that what I'm offering isn't just money, Lena. It's more than that. It's real." Lena closed her eyes for a moment, allowing herself to feel the weight of his words. She had never expected to find something real here, something genuine in the world of power, money, and fleeting moments. But in the quiet intimacy of the penthouse, as the night drew to a close, Lena began to believe there was something worth fighting for between them. The money was still in her hand, and she could leave with it, change everything about her life. But now, for the first time, she wasn't so sure if the price of the night was truly the freedom she had sought, or if the price would be losing the chance at something far more valuable, something she couldn't quite define yet, but something that felt like a possibility that was worth taking a chance on. Lena had just returned from a long, exhausting day at work when the call came. It was unexpected. Alexander Stone's name flashing on her phone screen made her pause. Her first instinct was to ignore it. After all, she had already received the money, and that had been the deal. The night had ended, and there was no need to think about it further, was there? But something told her she couldn't ignore this call, not after everything that had happened. With a deep breath, she answered. "Hello?" "Lena." Alexander's voice was calm, but she could hear the urgency in it, the undercurrent of something more. "I need to talk to you." She was quiet for a moment, unsure what he could possibly want after everything had already been settled. But the way he said her name made her heart race, and without even fully understanding why, she found herself agreeing. "I'm listening." Alexander didn't waste time with small talk. "I want more than just a one-night deal, Lena. I want you in my life, not just for one night, but forever." The words hung in the air, settling over her like a thick fog. Lena was stunned, her thoughts momentarily blank. The shock reverberated through her, making her stomach churn. Forever. She had never expected this. It felt like an impossible dream, something she had never allowed herself to consider. She had already crossed a line that night, but this was something else entirely. "Are you serious?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper, as if she feared the very air would change if she said it out loud. "I am," he answered firmly, without hesitation. "Lena, I'm offering you more than just wealth and luxury. I'm offering you a life with me. A real life, one where you're not just a guest in my world, you're my equal, my partner, His words were filled with sincerity, but there was something deeper, something more vulnerable in his tone. Lena's mind raced. Everything Alexander was offering her seemed too good to be true. A life without struggle, a future where her every need could be met without a second thought. It was everything she had ever dreamed of, but never dared to believe she could actually have. But what did he mean by wanting her forever? Was this just another transaction, dressed in the guise of affection? "Why me?" she asked, her voice faltering slightly. She needed to understand. She had been an ordinary woman, struggling to make ends meet. She wasn't like the women Alexander was used to, beautiful, poised, elegant in every way. She was just Lena. So why her? Why now? Alexander's silence on the other end of the phone made her second-guess the question. She hadn't meant to sound doubtful, but it had slipped out. She couldn't help it. The idea that someone as powerful, as capable as Alexander would want her seemed so far-fetched. She had always been the one who had to fight for every inch of ground in her life. Nothing ever came easy, and everything she had gained had been hard-won. This felt too easy, too perfect. When Alexander finally spoke, his voice was soft but resolute. "Because I see you. I see the real you, not just the woman who took my money. I see someone who's strong, independent, and deserves more. You're not like the others. You don't hide behind money or status or the image people expect. You have a heart that's real, Lena. And I want that heart. I want to build something with you, not just for you." The words were like a balm to a wound she hadn't realized was there. She had spent so much of her life trying to be seen, trying to be more than just the small-town girl, struggling to get by. But now, in his words, she heard the truth. Alexander wasn't seeing her as a means to an end or a fleeting pleasure. He was seeing her for who she truly was. The woman who had worked so hard, the woman who had fought for every ounce of happiness. Lena felt a lump form in her throat as her emotions began to well up inside her. This wasn't just about the money, the luxury, or even the power he could offer. It was about something deeper, a connection she hadn't anticipated, a bond that was both thrilling and terrifying. "Why would you want this, though?" she whispered, still trying to grasp the magnitude of the situation. "I don't know what I have to offer you, besides what we shared that night. I'm not a part of your world. I don't belong in it." There it was, the crux of her fears. She wasn't like the women Alexander was used to, the ones who were born into money, who understood the rules of his world, who had the poise and grace to be by his side. She was just a woman from a small town struggling to figure it out. Could she ever truly fit into a world like his? Alexander didn't falter. "You belong exactly where you are, Lena. Right here. With me. Your heart is something worth more than everything I've built. More than money. More than status. I've spent my whole life building an empire, but the only thing I've never been able to build is something real, and I think that's what I've found in you." His words hit her like a wave, crashing over her with a force she hadn't prepared for. She had lived her life thinking that love, real love, was something unattainable for someone like her. She had seen it in movies, read about it in books, but never truly believed it was meant for her. But now, in his voice, in the sincerity of his offer, she felt something shift inside her. It wasn't just about the life Alexander could provide. It was about something more. It was about the possibility of being seen, of being valued for who she truly was, not for what she could offer or how much money she could bring into his world. He wanted her heart, and in that moment, Lena realized just how much she longed to give it to him. "Alexander, I don't know if I can believe this," she confessed, her voice barely a whisper. She was torn between the woman who had always been cautious, always guarded, and the woman who was beginning to believe that maybe, just maybe, she could have more. But what if it's too much? What if we both get hurt in the end? I'm not afraid of getting hurt, he replied, his voice low, steady, because I know what I want, Lena. And what I want is you. All of you, not just for tonight, not just for a deal, but for the rest of our lives. There it was, the proposal she had never imagined but had secretly yearned for. A chance for something real, a chance for love, connection, and a life she could only dream of. But it wasn't just about the fairy tale. This was real. And the question now wasn't whether she could trust him, but whether she could trust herself to take a step into the unknown, to allow herself to believe in something as beautiful and terrifying as love. For the first time, Lena allowed herself to hope. Lena sat alone in her small apartment, her mind a whirlwind of conflicting thoughts. The phone call from Alexander still echoed in her ears, the words, the promise, the offer of a future she could hardly fathom. Every part of her wanted to believe it, wanted to believe that this wasn't just a game, that it wasn't some grand illusion designed to pull her in and discard her when the thrill wore off. But the more she thought about it, the more questions crept into her mind, and the doubts began to consume her. She had spent her entire life battling for survival. She had worked long hours at jobs that drained her, scraped by with every paycheck, trying to keep her family afloat. It was all she had ever known. She had never expected anything more than this, never expected someone like Alexander Stone, a man who held the world in his hands, to look at her like she was someone worthy of being by his side. It seemed like a dream. And yet here she was, sitting in her modest apartment, unable to shake the weight of the decision that lay ahead of her. Lena had never been the type to believe in fairy tales. She was practical, grounded in the harsh realities of life. She had never imagined someone would offer her more than what she could ever dream of, a life of luxury, freedom from the burden of bills, and a love that seemed to promise everything she had been missing. But now, the very idea of it felt like a weight on her chest. Could she trust him? Could she really believe that someone as powerful and wealthy as Alexander could see her, really see her as more than just a fleeting escape from his world? What if she was just another conquest, just another pretty face to add to his collection of women? The thought made her heart ache, the fear creeping in like a cold shadow. Was she just another prize to him? She had worked hard all her life, struggling for everything she had. She had fought tooth and nail for respect, for dignity, for recognition. Now, here she was, offered a life of unimaginable luxury and wealth. But at what cost? Would she lose herself in this new world? Was she merely a project for Alexander to fix or mold into something she was not? Would the real Lena, the girl from Alabama, disappear, drowned in his perfect world of shiny cars and glamorous parties? Lena pushed herself up from the couch, walking across the room, her thoughts spinning. She felt as if she was standing at a precipice, gazing into an unknown future, unsure of whether to take a step forward or retreat back into the safety of what she had known. The very idea of trusting Alexander, of letting him into her heart, terrified her. How could she trust someone who had everything when she had so little? She had seen it all before. The men who saw her as a means to an end, the wealthy who never looked past the surface. She had always been judged, always been dismissed because of her background. So why would Alexander be any different? And yet, every time she thought of him, she felt a pull. When they were together, it wasn't just about the money or the world he inhabited. It was something else, a connection that ran deeper than she could understand. Was that even possible? Could someone as complex as Alexander really care for someone like her? Did he see her for who she truly was, or was she just a convenient escape from his world of business deals and public appearances? The thought of losing herself in his world terrified Lena. She had always been fiercely independent, always prided herself on not relying on anyone. But here she was, faced with an offer that promised everything, and she was unsure whether to take it or run in the opposite direction. Sitting down again, Lena closed her eyes, trying to block out the noise in her mind. She could still hear Alexander's voice, the sincerity in it when he said he saw the real her. She could still feel the warmth of his touch, the way he had held her, as if she was more than just a woman to be used. The way he had listened to her stories, the way he had shared his own struggles with her, it had all been so different from what she had imagined. It had felt real. For the first time in a long time, it had felt like she mattered. But could she trust that? Could she trust him? What if this was just another lie, another way to manipulate her into something she wasn't ready for? The fear of being judged weighed heavily on her too. The world had never been kind to women like her, the ones who didn't come from money or privilege. It didn't matter how smart or capable she was. It only mattered where she came from. How could she, a woman from a poor background, be with a man like Alexander? Would people laugh at her? Would they think she was using him for his wealth? Was she just a pawn in a game she didn't even understand? Lena had seen enough to know how cruel the world could be to people like her. She knew the way the rich and powerful looked down on the poor, the way they treated people like her as disposable. She had spent her life fighting against that, trying to carve out a space for herself where she could be seen as more than just a statistic. The thought of being judged, of being labeled as someone who was just in it for the money, made her stomach turn. But as she sat there, alone in the dimly lit room, she couldn't help but feel the pull of something stronger than fear. The connection with Alexander was real. The way he cared for her, the way he had been there for her without hesitation, it had felt different from anything she had ever experienced. For the first time, someone had seen her, not just her struggles or her mistakes, but her strength, her heart. Alexander had made her feel like she was more than the girl from Alabama, more than the woman who had to fight for everything. Tears welled up in her eyes as the weight of everything she was feeling finally hit her. She had always told herself that she didn't need anyone, that she could survive on her own. But now, as she thought of Alexander's words, the vulnerability in his eyes, she realized that maybe she had been lying to herself all along. Maybe she wasn't as strong as she thought. Maybe she had been yearning for something deeper all along. A connection. A love that didn't judge her or see her as less than. What if Alexander was that chance? But could she risk it? Could she risk opening herself up to someone like him when she had so much to lose? The thought of surrendering her heart, of trusting him completely, terrified her. She had built her life on survival, on being self-sufficient. To open herself to someone else meant she would have to give up that control. It meant she would have to trust. Lena stood up abruptly, pacing the small apartment, her hands running through her hair in frustration. She didn't know what to do. She was torn between two worlds, the one she had fought so hard to build, and the one Alexander was offering her. Could she have both? Could she be the woman she had always been and still let him into her life? Or would she lose herself in the process? One thing was clear. The battle inside her wasn't just about Alexander. It was about herself. It was about whether she was ready to believe in something more, to trust that love could be real, that she could be loved for who she truly was, and not just for what she could give. The struggle within was fierce, but it was also the most honest battle she had ever faced. It wasn't just about Alexander, it was about Lena learning to trust herself, to believe in her own worth, and to take a chance on something that could change everything. But would she? Only time would tell. The evening air was cool. As Lena and Alexander strolled through the park, the dim light from the nearby street lamps casting a soft glow on the pathway. The silence between them felt comforting, yet it weighed heavily on Lena's mind. It was a quiet kind of tension, one that had been building inside her ever since their first encounter. The doubts, the confusion, the fear, it was all beginning to surface, and she couldn't carry it any longer. Her heart raced, and as they passed under an arch of trees, Lena could no longer keep the question bottled up. She had to ask. She turned to Alexander, her voice trembling slightly as she spoke, the words spilling out before she could stop them. "Why do you care so much about me? I'm just a woman who accepted your money. That's all I am to you, isn't it?" The words stung as they left her lips, but they felt like the only thing she could ask. It was the question that had been haunting her, lurking in the back of her mind since the moment Alexander's offer had come into her life. She had spent her entire life struggling to survive, to prove her worth in a world that had never been kind to her. She had accepted his offer, and in doing so, she had feared that she had become just another transaction, something to be bought and discarded. She needed to know the truth. For a moment, Alexander didn't respond. His pace slowed, and Lena could feel his gaze on her, intense and unwavering. When she finally dared to look up at him, she saw something in his eyes, something soft, something vulnerable. It wasn't the look of a man who had made a business transaction. It was something deeper, something real. He stopped walking and turned to face her. The park around them seemed to quiet even more, as if the world had stopped just for this moment. The wind rustled gently through the leaves above them, but all Lena could hear was the pounding of her own heart. "Because I see the strength in you that no one else does," Alexander said, his voice low and steady. "I see how much you've fought for everything you have, the way you've lived, the way you've carried yourself, how you've never given up, despite everything. That's what matters to me, Lena. That's why I care." Lena's breath caught in her throat. She had expected him to brush her off, to explain away his feelings, maybe even laugh off her insecurities. But he didn't. His words didn't feel like just an answer to her question. They felt like a revelation. They were something Lena had never dared to believe in herself, something she had never let herself feel. She had always thought of herself as ordinary, as someone destined to stay in the background, unnoticed, unimportant. But here was Alexander, the powerful, successful CEO, telling her that he saw strength in her, that he saw something in her that others had overlooked or dismissed. She stood there, frozen, trying to comprehend what he had just said. He wasn't talking about her beauty, her charm, or her ability to play the part of a perfect companion. He was talking about the essence of who she was, the quiet strength she had carried with her through the hardest parts of her life. He had seen it, recognized it, and cared about it. "I don't want you to feel like you're less than anyone else just because of your background," Alexander continued, his words gentle but filled with conviction. "Lena, your past doesn't define you. What defines you is who you are now, what you've overcome, and how much strength it's taken for you to get to this point. I see that, and it's why I care. It's why I want you in my life, not just for one night, but for as long as you'll have me." The weight of his words settled over her like a comforting blanket, and for the first time, Lena felt a surge of emotion that she couldn't quite control. A tear slipped down her cheek before she could stop it. It wasn't out of sadness or fear, but out of a deep sense of release. A release from the burdens she had carried for so long, the burdens that had convinced her she wasn't worthy of being loved, of being seen as someone valuable. She had always been so careful to guard herself, to keep people at arm's length. She had built walls around her heart because it was safer that way. She didn't let herself believe in the kindness of others, especially not from someone like Alexander. She had told herself over and over that it was just a business arrangement, just a night that would be forgotten. But in that moment, standing under the canopy of trees, Lena realized that she had been wrong. This wasn't just a transaction. Alexander wasn't offering her just money, just a night of companionship. Today, it felt like time had come full circle. As they walked down the familiar path, Lena noticed the blooming flowers, the sound of children playing in the distance, and the warmth of the sun on her skin. Everything felt perfect, calm, beautiful, and full of promise. But what struck her the most was the look in Alexander's eyes. It was the same look he had given her when he had first seen her, the way he saw her beyond the surface, beyond the expectations of the world. He still saw her as the woman who was strong, capable, and deserving of everything life had to offer. "Lena," Alexander said, his voice filled with tenderness and sincerity, "there's something I've been wanting to ask you for a long time." Her heart skipped a beat. She had no idea what was coming, but the look in his eyes told her everything. This wasn't just another grand gesture or offer, it was something deeper, something far more meaningful. "I've spent years with you, building a life that is full of love and understanding," Alexander continued, his voice shaking slightly with emotion. "And every single day with you has been a gift. You've shown me what it means to truly love and be loved. I've seen you grow, and I've seen us grow together. I've learned that love isn't about what we have, but about who we are, and how we choose to share ourselves with the world." Lena felt tears welling up in her eyes as she listened to him speak. She had always feared that love would be fleeting, that it would come with strings attached or expectations that she couldn't meet. But Alexander had shown her that love could be pure, that it could exist without conditions. He paused for a moment, taking a deep breath before he dropped to one knee. The world seemed to stand still as Lena's heart raced. She couldn't breathe, couldn't speak. This moment was too surreal, too beautiful to grasp. "Lena Parker," he said, his voice filled with unwavering certainty, "will you marry me?" Lena's heart exploded with joy. She couldn't hold back the tears any longer. All the years of questioning, all the doubts and fears she had once carried with her, dissolved in that instant. This was the moment she had been waiting for, the moment that sealed everything they had fought for, everything they had built. She looked down at him, her heart overflowing with love, and whispered the only word that felt right. "Yes." The word came so easily, but it was heavy with meaning. Yes to the man who had shown her the depths of unconditional love. Yes to a life built on trust, respect, and mutual understanding. Yes to a future where nothing mattered more than the bond they shared. Alexander stood up, his eyes glistening with happiness. He wrapped his arms around her, pulling her into a tight embrace. They stood there, holding each other in the park as the world continued to turn around them. But in that moment, nothing else existed. It was just the two of them, standing on the foundation of everything they had built together. For Lena, this wasn't just a proposal. It was the culmination of everything she had learned over the years. She had come to understand that love was never about wealth or status. It wasn't about what you had or where you came from. It was about finding someone who truly saw you for who you were and who loved you unconditionally. Alexander had taught her that love could break down the walls that society had built, that it could heal the wounds of the past, and that it could bridge the gaps between two seemingly different worlds. They had defied the odds. They had shown the world that love didn't care about race, money, or background. It only cared about two people choosing each other day after day, in good times and bad, through challenges and triumphs. Love was the one thing that connected them, that made them stronger, that made them whole. As the sun began to set behind the trees, casting a soft golden light over the park, Alexander and Lena shared a kiss that spoke of promises, of dreams fulfilled, and of a future together. The kiss was more than just a symbol of their commitment. It was a promise that no matter what came their way, they would face it together, as a team, with love and faith in each other. And in that moment, Lena knew, without a shadow of a doubt, that love was the greatest gift of all. It was the one thing that could never be bought, never be sold, and never be taken away. It was the one thing that, no matter the circumstances, would endure forever. Together, they would face whatever came next, knowing that their love was more than enough. It was everything. The world would always have its judgments, its divisions, its barriers. But Lena and Alexander had proven that love was the force that could tear those down. And as they walked hand in hand into their future, they knew that no matter what society had to say, their love was stronger than anything that could stand in its way.